we'll trust your wisdom on all that stuff. Look at all those degrees in that wall. Oh my goodness. I just want to. All right.
And art. And art.
And art. And exactly. And art. And Jorge would notice the art for sure. So great. It's really great to have you all here. Welcome to our audience. The CUNY Black Male Initiative is proud to host our monthly town hall meeting. And this is our meeting that is titled today, The United States of Our Mental Health and Wellness, Fears, Feelings, and Futures. And we're delighted to have three esteemed panelists today. For those who don't know, and you may have seen me for the first time, my name is Dr. Sean Best, and I'm the University Director for the CUNY Black Male Initiative, which is an initiative funded by the City Council that's been around for going on 15 years now. October 1st, we'll be celebrating 15 years to just support primarily Black and Latino males who are at the CUNY system, but we serve a variety of students outside of Black and Latino males. We serve women, we serve those who are not Black and Latino. We used to serve about 4,000 students across all 24, now 25 CUNY institutions. And so we're lucky to do the work that we do because we're able to support those who are getting their high school equivalency, those who are in community college, senior colleges. We also support those who are in medical school or law school, including my assistant director, Jorge Alguera, who's helping me produce this series today, who just started his first month of law school this past few weeks. And so we're excited for him with the CUNY BMI Pipeline to Justice Law Program at the CUNY Law School. And then we also serve a huge population of re-entry students, those who are coming from justice backgrounds back into college. And so with that being said, CUNY BMI provides the mentoring support, the academic programming support, and socio-emotional support necessary for students to thrive in their degrees and to go on to have robust careers outside of school after they're done. And we do that through a lot of different supports. We have BMI directors, 31 BMI directors for 31 projects. We have mentors who are peer mentors who help guide those students along the way. And then also we have amazing events throughout the years like this, like the town hall, as well as our upcoming BMI conference that's going to be on October 1st and 2nd. And through that, we are able to just connect students across campuses, as well as get connected to the greater New York City networks of those who are doing this important work of supporting primarily Black and brown students who are trying to thrive and emotionally be successful, as well as physically and career-wise be successful in their endeavors. And so with that being said, I just want to say hello to our panelists. Good afternoon to you all. It's great to see you. And what I'll do is just do a quick overview of your bios and a little bit about just kind of stunt on them a little bit and show how fly you are and tell your story. And then we'll kind of delve in and you can tell a little bit more of your own story in your own way. So I want to first begin this conversation by saying that we always want to acknowledge what a difficult time we're in right now, with over 180,000 deaths due to the coronavirus pandemic that we're all facing, and having so many millions of Americans being affected by physical health conditions, as well as even the millions of Americans that are now chiming up and responding to the need and call for police reform through the Black Lives Matter movement. We realize that we're in a really difficult sort of storm, perfect storm of physical health challenges, mental health challenges, as well as even just the career challenges. There's a record of unemployment, number of unemployed people in the United States, as well as even people just leaving major cities and deciding to go to the suburbs. I know even personally, as I'm looking to support family and help people with getting housing and securing homes, even when you try to move to a place outside New York City, the asking price is like so high and everyone's selling their homes and people are vacating the urban area. So with that triumphant of factors in place, we realize that there are a lot of mental health challenges that we're facing. And a lot of times Black and brown folks are disproportionately affected by these issues. And therefore BMI exists at a perfect time to help support our students, faculty, staff, and administrators in getting the resources they need to be successful and to thrive. So with that being said, I'm going to start with the bios and then I'm going to go right into for asking you to just sort of elaborate a little bit on what you do, who you are, and then we can kind of jump into the conversation. So first I'll start with Dr. Henry McCurtis, who I've had the pleasure to meet through Ron West, our connection here and staff member with CUNY BMI. And just a little bit of overview of who he is. I just want to read a little bit of his bio. So he is a world-renowned psychiatrist, psychoanalyst with a specialty in addiction psychiatry, with an integrative psychiatry practice based on a diagnostic assessment and treatment guided by biological, physiological, psychological, social, and behavioral paradigms. He has a developmental orientation toward understanding human behavior. He has a keen interest in the phase of life problems resulting in the major transitions in development, such as the passage from adolescence to young adulthood, marriage, divorce, midlife adjustments, retirement, and grief and bereavement. He has a cross-cultural sensitivity developed in the crucible of the rural South during the sunset of Jim Crow and the dawn of the civil rights era, and refined in the academic environment of a traditionally Black college during the most intense period of the social change. He also is a good friend of those that are on this panelist and has always been a New York City mainstay and staple to increasing the emotional resourcefulness of our people and the environment here. So I want to welcome you, Dr. Henry McCurtis. Great to have you here today. And we will look forward to having your expertise added to this conversation.
Thank you.
Secondly, I want to introduce Dr. Shatisse Riley, and I'll read a little bit about her. She is a licensed psychologist. She earned her doctoral degree from the University of Akron in Ohio and has 2 master's degrees from Columbia University. Did you ever hang out with LeBron James back in Akron?
No.
Well, there's a cool Ohio connection there. She completed her clinical internship at the North Bronx Healthcare Network in the Bronx, New York. She has more than 10 years of clinical experience and has worked with a broad spectrum of patients in various clinical settings, including hospitals, community health centers, facility treatment facilities, university student mental health centers, and also in private practice. She has expertise treating a wide range of clinical disorders, including depressive disorders, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. She's founded SR Psychological Services to offer a safe and supportive therapeutic environment to promote healing and psychological wellness. And I want to dive into all those things and more. Dr. Shatisse Riley, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And finally, a great friend of CUNY BMI, of Ron West, who connected us initially, and also who has a student who is actually a BMI student currently at City College in the Sophie Davis Medical Success Program. I want to introduce Dr. Jeff Gardier. He's hosted our fundraisers, our BMI annual fundraisers. He's been giving us videos to help promote the work that we've done, and now sits on our advisory committee as well. And so just real quick intro about Dr. Jeff. Many of you already have known and heard from him. He's one of the most widely sought after experts in the field of mental health. In addition to having a private practice in Manhattan, he's also an associate professor and course director of behavioral medicine at Touro College of Osteopathic Medicine in New York City. He's also an ordained interfaith minister, which I did not realize until I read that today, with a doctorate in divinity from the New Seminary. And so Dr. Jeff Gardier also is known as America's psychologist. Many of you may recognize him from the Real Housewives of Atlanta, with a prominent role there for many years. Also prolific author of 4 books and a contributing author of a half dozen books, including the brand new text, The Causes of Autism. In addition to being a respected academician, Dr. Jeff has been a contributor on the Fox Network, Today Show, MSNBC, and CNN. He's also was the host of VH1's Dad Camp, and also he's the aftercare coordinator and psychologist for Lauren Lake's Fraternity Court. So I want to welcome you, Dr. Jeff. Glad to have you here. Thank you for being such a good friend.
Dr. Sean Best, it is my pleasure. It is my honor to be on with Dr. Riley, who is my good friend, who I've known for many, many years. And it is a thrill of a lifetime, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, to be on with the living legend, Dr. Henry McCurtis. This is a man who has made life for us much more tolerable in this very racist society. Dr. McCurtis, thank you so very much for all the incredible work that you do. We honor you, we love you, and we thank you.
Thank you for those kind words.
Absolutely. And so here's what I want to do. I want us to have a little fun. I want to have a little seriousness and some levity, but I want to go back and forth and first just kind of start out with a little bit about how you all became such rock stars in your own perspective fields, and kind of a little bit elaborate on what you're doing now and how your business has adjusted through the COVID-19 crisis. So since Dr. Gardia, you spoke last, would you mind just elaborating what's going on with you now? What are you doing, and how has COVID-19 changed your approach to practice?
Well, I'm living in Connecticut now, and we actually left New York City. I still have my apartment there. I'll never, ever give that up. I'm a New York boy, Manhattan boy all the way. So my apartment is sitting there like a museum, has furniture, paintings, whatever. I think the only residents are probably the water bugs in this huge building, right? But we came out here about a year ago at the urging of my wife, who grew up in Philadelphia and wanted to be in a more suburban setting. So we moved to Connecticut. I did not want to go, Dr. Best, but you know that old song, Green Acres, you are my wife, goodbye city life. So, you know, we moved out here, but I'm telling you something, and I've discussed this with Dr. Riley offline many times. I'm sitting in a forest, a house in a forest. If I never had to leave this place again, I would never go. I would never want to go out to dinner again. I would never want to see people again other than through Zoom and psychology, telepsychiatry. I am so content here. It's like an early retirement, except I have never worked so damn hard in my life. And my colleagues will tell you the same thing. Since COVID-19, we have been sitting in front of computers, writing our books, doing all the things we've had to do to adjust to Earth 2.0, starting at about 7 in the morning till 8 or 9 o'clock at night, 6 to 7 days a week. It's been crazy. So I've been doing a lot of that. And then every once in a while, I'm being deployed. That's what I call it, deployed back to New York City to either teach classes or do some proctoring or some other things. So really my life now has been in front of these computer screens. I have 2 computer screens. I'm gonna get a third one just so I can pretend that I'm on Star Trek. But you know, this is life now. I don't think we'll ever go back to those days of working in our offices 5 days a week. We're gonna be doing a lot more remote stuff. We're gonna be saving the environment, hopefully, to some extent. And this is our new reality. But of course, we've seen what COVID-19 has done disproportionately to brown and Black people, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that.
Certainly, we certainly will. And thank you for that Star Trek visual, because I do feel like, you know, we've always had these TV shows trying to predict the future, and the future is now here. And so we thank you for
You got that right. Check it out. Computer, beam me up. There's our computer now, right?
exactly.
Rooms. This is our computer. Everything is here. And by the way, as far as when you talked about people moving away to the suburbs and so on, I've got something to say about that. You can run, but you can't hide.
Right.
You're right about that. You're right about that. Dr. Riley, please pick up from there. I'd love to hear, like, how have you been personally? How have you adjusted? And then also, how has business changed and supporting people with their mental and emotional health in the past 6 months?
So much has changed in life for all of us during this time. Prior to the pandemic, we were in our office seeing patients. Since the pandemic, we've gone 100% to remote telehealth sessions. And I can tell you that we have had double the number of patients reach out to us for support during this time. Our business has increased significally. Patients are reaching out. Sometimes we get 15 phone calls in a day of patients requesting teletherapy appointments. Prior to this pandemic, we didn't do any telehealth. And now this is all that we do. Initially, I didn't feel so comfortable. I thought this sort of interpersonal aspect of doing therapy was really very important. And I would worry that that would get lost in doing telehealth work. And the feedback that we've received, like the clinicians that work in my practice, the feedback that they've received from patients is that they really are responding well to telehealth sessions. They prefer it. And in fact, all of my clinicians said that they have no interest in returning to work in the practice in Manhattan.
Mm.
So that's something that I have to sort of figure out as a practice owner. How do we handle this? Because this is the reality for many people. They said patients are responding well, it's convenient, they can still get the support, the help, the guidance that they need by getting the services from home. And so there's a lot of talks that I'm having with my staff about how, we talk regularly about how we continue to do this. Is this working? What can we do differently? We're doing our best to meet the demand. I mean, there's just more and more and more and more. Help. Like people are seeking us out. And so it's changed a lot. I don't know like what the future holds, if we'll continue to be 100% remote. I think that might be the case, although people have mixed feelings about that. Some of the psychologists have said, I feel sad about that. I like going in and sitting down in person and meeting with people, and I'm adjusting to this new reality, but it doesn't make me, comfortable 100%. So I'm just continuing to assess how this is working and trying to do our best to support the people that seek us out. And personally, just adjusting to the uncertainty and the things that I don't know what will happen. So every day I'm focused on, well, what can I control today? What can I do today? Who can I help?
But Dr. Riley, one of the things that you and I talked about, and I'm sure Dr. McCurtis may agree with this, we're getting more Black folks than we've ever gotten before.
Oh, absolutely.
The ease of being able to just dial in, and certainly what COVID has done. And then I'll just keep quiet now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the number of patients of color, Black patients in particular, that are reaching out for me has been significant compared to 5 years or even 2 years ago. People are going online, they're doing Google searches and they're typing in Black therapist, Black psychologist. I mean, they are specifically looking for someone that they feel that they would be comfortable with, that they can sort of get past some of this, some aspects of who they are with the person that they feel would understand them. And if I'm not able to meet with the person, they say, well, I want someone in your practice, but they have to be Black. And so that is a request that I probably get 8 out of 10 times that I get requests for services. And so it's busy, we do what we can to provide the support. But the stigma around seeking mental health services has, I think, significantly been reduced, particularly among young Black people who are on the internet, and they're talking about things like depression openly, sadness, anxiety, all the things that previous, let's say, generations didn't talk about so openly.
Well, I want to jump into that a little bit more in depth as well, because I even think about my own journey with therapy and when I was 24 and began that, and how much of a stigma there was around that, even for me back in the 90s, where, there was this kind of this attitude about, especially if you had a religious background like I did, growing up in a very charismatic, Pentecostal, Black church experience, where a lot of times the remedy was always just bring it to Jesus, leave it at the altar, and he'll fix it, right? And so now that we're in this place where there's openness to, for Black and brown folks who are like me, who just started with a Google search, Black therapist, New York City, and then finding out like every Black therapist that I wanted to get, to talk to had a waiting list that was extensive and was hard to find. I want to delve into that and how you've even made your practice even more accessible and some of the stuff that you're doing. But just, I know, Dr. Riley, you said, talk about the growth that you've experienced. How have your numbers grown in terms of like your team in the past few months? What do they look like now?
Yeah, I think I probably have hired since March, since we stopped providing services in the office, I probably have hired at least 8 clinicians, licensed clinicians. So we have social workers, psychologists, and mental health counselors. And it's just to meet the demand, because we have people calling, we have a waiting list. And so we're trying to, provide help to as many people that reach out to us for help.
And I was talking to you a little bit pre-game about just what if there was like a Yelp for Black therapists, right? Because it's so hard to find one. But can you talk about maybe some of the networks you're part of that give access to those who want to find someone who might look like them or have similar experiences as therapists?
Well, I'm on a site called Therapy for Black Girls. And that site has Black clinicians from all across the country that list their bio, their credentials, their experiences, where their offices are located. And I have had a number of young people reach me from that site to book an appointment with the practice. So there's a couple of different sites online, but that's one that I can think of specifically that focuses on Black clinicians and trying to sort of connect patients, young people who are seeking out Black therapists, trying to make that connection.
Good stuff. We'll collect some of these resources and ideas and share them with our community afterwards. So I know Jorge, our producers in the background, jotting these down. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. McCurtis, I want to go on also just hear from you a little bit about just how has your practice evolved? What are you focused on now? Are you writing? Are you speaking? What sort of things have been your focus in the past 6 months and also at this stage of your career, your illustrious career?
Well, like my colleagues, the volume is up in terms of the demand. My practice has always been a blend of public and private. I've been in this room since 1978. And
I was born in 1977, so there we go.
My daughter was born in 77. We're in the blackout, the year of the blackout.
Yep, exactly. I didn't want them to see what was coming, Dr.
But I've tried to integrate public and private. And to this day, that's what I do. I consult for Samaritan Village in the South Bronx. And I run this private practice. I'm chief cook and bottle washer back here. No staff, just me. But the volume is up. With the clinic, the consulting that I do in the South Bronx, we had to shift over to telehealth. And I managed that on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. The rest of the time, I'm here. The impact of the pandemic and then the emergence of the endemic racial strife has created a situation that's resulted in regression across the board for everybody. And so you see people trying to adapt to the pandemic and the endemic racism with either two things: denial or catastrophic Chicken Little sort of responses. And that's all on top of their pre-existing conditions determined by their individual core beliefs, how they manage uncertainty and insecurity. So a lot of anxiety. Just last night, I was on the phone with a mother of a teenager who is experiencing school refusal after having been sequestered in the suburbs, afraid to go out for 3 months, experiencing all of the various other issues associated with the pandemic. And now the child is getting ready to return to school and is in the throes of school refusal based on fearing that she'll get sick if she goes to school, pleading with her mother not to send her to school. This is just one example. You go through the day, you see all kinds of situations that are pandemic related, blended with pre-existing problems. And so it's a challenge, really, for someone like myself to learn, because you asked, what am I doing? I'm doing what I always do, and that is try to learn something every day. And so this offers me that opportunity to do that.
Beautiful. That's awesome. And Dr. McCurtis, I want to kind of learn more about what you're learning in this phrase. I have this sticky note that's on my my computer at work that says not goals but behaviors. Right, always trying to improve my behaviors and not so focus on the future or the past, but be present with what I'm deciding to do. And so, with that being said, I kind of want to jump off into learning in this moment. We are in an era, as you all have mentioned, where now Black people are more open to Black and Brown people, Latino, Latinx communities as well, are more open to receiving therapy and getting services and support for mental health that they were not open to previously, because of a lot of the stigma that was around mental health and what it looked like to be being considered a weak person who just needed assistance that kind of put you in sort of an inferior position in your relationships and your family. I even remember being in relationships and dating where, you know, partners would say to me, well, I don't believe in therapy. And so that was a sort of stalling out moment for even me personally with some people that I thought that I would have a long-term relationship with. So I'm just curious in terms of like, how do you all even characterize the era that we're in and the openness that we now have to getting mental health support? And if somebody's watching this and says, I know this is something that's been on my heart and I've been wanting to consider for a long time, but I don't know where to begin, where would you tell them to begin? How would you get them to get started? And what's sort of an emotionally safe way to like sort of bridge these conversations with sometimes people with themselves, or sometimes people want to talk to someone in their family who knows they need the help, but they don't know how to begin that because they don't want to look like they're telling somebody that they're weak or that they're inferior in any way. So maybe Dr. Riley, you can jump us off with that, and then maybe whoever wants to go next.
Okay, thanks. How I typically explain to patients that, let's say I'm on a screening call with someone who's interested in scheduling an appointment with one of the therapists. And they say, well, I mean, I've been struggling for years, but I never thought that therapy was for me because I'm not crazy. Then how I sort of introduce it to them is to say, think of it as just a place where you go and you talk to a trained professional, a safe place where you can express your thoughts and feelings and have someone who's trained help you process them. It's a place where you can go and not feel judged and talk about your experiences, and then have someone help you sort through some of these complicated emotions. And I explained to them that I don't use the word crazy at all. It's okay to talk to a professional about what you're going through in your life and get some support on how to resolve, work through, improve, or feel better about your circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dr. Jeff, I go to the gym. I eat well. I have my friends that I play sports with. Those are enough outlets. Why does mental health matter? Why does talking to a therapist, how does that improve my life?
Because we have to look at the mind, body, spirit connection, right? So you go to the gym, which is great. And by the way, you're braver than I am because I'm still not going to the gym yet. I have my Peloton and I'm doing my upper body outside, you know, body weights and so on. But I will soon go back to the gym. That's if I ever want to leave the place that I've now become exiled to. What a strange life. But, you know, it is important that we look at not just physical health, but that we also look at emotional and mental health. I don't talk so much about mental illness because we know those are things, you know, that are part of our realities. Certainly Dr. Riley and Dr. McCurtis, you know, as a psychiatrist, you know, having sometimes to medicate folks and so on, we know those are necessary things that need to be done and need to be addressed. But I think it's so important for us now, especially post, well, we're still in COVID-19, but since the beginning of this pandemic, in many ways, it has lifted the shroud, if you will, or the Ku Klux Klan, you know, hood, if you will, on the inequities and social injustice in the world. And we know that we have suffered for a long time. Folks like Dr. McCurtis and myself, when we were growing up, we were told by our parents, you have to work 10 times harder. You have to do 10 times more. You have to study, study, study much, much more. And you and Dr. Riley of a younger generation heard some of those things too. But I think what we're finding out with Black Lives Matter and why I'm so proud of this younger generation being out there and protesting peacefully and demonstrating peacefully is that they're doing the work. You know, the boots to the ground of, you know what? It's all well and good that we have to work so hard. It's all well and good that, you know, systemic racism hasn't kept us back, many of us, in that we are still moving forward, but it doesn't have to be our reality. Because I think what has happened is that a lot of people from my generation, because of Black Lives Matter, we've realized, you know what, we have been in the dark for too long. We've accepted way too much. You know, we've, you know, in many ways have said, okay, systemic racism is part of our lives, but we will continue to move forward. But in the meantime, it's killing us. The fight and flight that we're in all the time, you know, the adrenaline that is flowing all the time, the hypervigilance that's flowing all the time, the John Henryism that we have to go through of working, 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 but still we're not, you know, breaking through that glass ceiling, you know, where other people who don't look like us don't have to put in half that work and they're still getting more results than we are. That stuff is killing us. And that's why it's so important that we engage in, you know, in therapy with our psychiatrists, with our psychologists, with our social workers. If we need to get some sort of chemotherapy, in other words, medication, that we utilize that and do it in a safe manner. And Dr. McCurtis has gone a long way in breaking the stigma of that. For a long time, not only did we not want to do therapy, but we weren't going to take medication either. So I think now more than ever, and yes, Sean, you're doing all of the right things. You are a leader of your community, of our community. You're doing the things that are right for you to stay physically fit, to stay spiritually fit through your belief system in God and you know what you represent. But as you asked the question, and for so many out there, therapy, talking to someone, and you can start, by the way, with just talking to a trusted family member. You can start with, you know, talking to a trusted friend, but be aware, talk to the person who will listen and will tell you what it is that you need to hear and not what you want to hear, that they're going to give it to you straight, no chaser.
That's good. That's good stuff. And it excites me to think about the idea of starting the conversation with just those who are around you first. And when you say that, Dr. Gardir and even Dr. Riley, I'm just thinking about that transition, right, from generation to generation of being that open to be able to be emotionally expressive. I can literally remember my grandmother every time I would go to my grandparents' house. She would be sitting in the corner and wouldn't say probably 2 words the entire visit, right? And so like beginning those conversations in my mind seems like that's where the sort of breakthrough comes through and begins, at least for us. And so Dr. McCurtis, you talked about in some of your, even in the bio that I read, just like you watching through the rural South, you know, the transition of therapy and mental health support becoming an actual acceptable approach to dealing with life. In your own experience of your longtime practice, what have you seen that has been, I guess, a great best practice tool of becoming more emotionally aware and encouraging those who are in maybe our generation or generations before us to become comfortable with starting that conversation with those around us? How did you sort of usher through that new era of now being an acceptable way to approach building emotional resources into one's own life?
Well, I think for me, naturally, as a young practitioner, I wanted to fix things, to be able to have efficacy. And ultimately, you learn that you have to be like a ninja and to look for motivation. And my work is dependent entirely upon the motivation of the patient, the person who comes. And there are three things that motivate people: their pain, their curiosity, and coercion. And sometimes a blend of all three.
The coercion part, especially.
And so you have to be able to meet your patient at the intersection of those three motivating factors. I try to cultivate curiosity once I've eased the pain and help the person to gain some degree of efficacy and autonomy. You mentioned the people in reentry. I do a lot of work with people in reentry in the South Bronx, and people who autonomy is a word, non-existent. They're motivated by basic needs. And so you meet the person where their needs are, their SSI, qualifying for SSI. If you can help a person to really qualify. I remember a man came to me one day, dark shades, really, he had decided that he was going to come and be crazy in order for me to write his paper for SSI. And as I got his story, I confronted him and I let him know that you don't really have to pretend to be crazy. Because his story was one of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse of childhood that had pushed him into adolescence, where delinquency had put him right into the pipeline, and he had just come to me after 25 years of incarceration, had lost an eye in adolescence to police violence. So here was a man with PTSD from early years. He didn't have to fake anything. He didn't have to pretend anything. But you catch the person where their motivation is. He wanted his basic needs met. But letting him tell his story in an environment that's understanding and accepting. We're now in the third appeal for his SSI. But here's a man who would never walk into a psychiatrist's office,
right,
out of curiosity. And if he was coerced,
yeah,
but he had a basic need that motivated him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
So you have to catch the person at where they're motivated.
Yeah, I love that sort of that triumphant or that sort of triage of uh, pain, curiosity, coercion. Find out where their motivation lies, right, and address that. So when I think about the CUNY Black Male Initiative, we are primarily existing to serve men of color, those who identify as men, and to be able to make sure that they have the supports they need, because Black and Latino males have the lowest retention rates at CUNY. And so we're here to correct that problem. And I think about when I think about like the challenges that our men are facing because of the different challenges, and I'll go into the COVID and some of the police brutality crisis in our country in the next section of our conversation. But when I think about just in general, just the male ego, right? The idea of being a man and opening up to begin to talk about pain, talk about their curiosity, talk about them being coerced and forced to talk to a therapist because maybe their wife is going to divorce them if they don't, or they have some sort of threat in the background. Dr. McCurtis, could you just expand on that a little bit and talk about what, if you can almost like just synthesize into like phases, or what areas that we think that men often have to go through in order to become more open to have these conversations? What are some onboarding techniques or some, future mapping ideas you can give to the public and to us about how do we encourage men to open up and to be vulnerable and express to the point where they can identify the reasons why mental health support can be instrumental in their lives?
Well, here again, if a man is in enough pain, and if the people in his life are coercing him, you have a chance to cultivate curiosity. You have to first, though, I think, depending on what the pain is, you have to explain it. You have to be able to, I talked to a young man and his father who was experiencing the first break psychosis. And he smoked marijuana every day.
Can you just elaborate real quick on first break psychosis? What does that mean, in layman's terms?
It had never been psychotic. He was thinking that he was seeing things through the third eye, and that people were controlling his mind through telepathy.
Oh, is that what that's called? I might have to go and check my my notes here. I might have that too. No, but that's a serious matter. I do want to hear more about this.
But at any rate, his problem began when he went off to college. And within the first semester, he stopped that transition, adolescence, transition, that passage into adulthood. Very stressful period. And we don't have a passage to prepare people in our culture, but it's a real thing that a man or woman is going through. He went off to college to play football. Well, he wound up not going to practice, not reading the playbook. He decided he wanted to become a rapper, and he was smoking marijuana every day. So he was there for a semester. And it was downhill from then on, smoking, and trying to rap. And then he became psychotic, full-blown psychosis. But he didn't believe the way he conceptualized what was wrong with him was that he could see through the third eye and he could connect people through telepathy, and he was still smoking. Well, what do? I addressed the psychosis chemically by helping his father to convince him to take medication, reduce the psychosis. He's still smoking marijuana every day. And now we're in a difficult time because marijuana has been legalized and everybody's smoking it. And so people don't see it as a problem. So you got a double thing. I had to leave that alone I couldn't even talk about that other than to begin to negotiate a cut down, harm reduction.
Mm.
Um,
Can
but
I elaborate on that a little bit? So, and I kind of want to jump in because I feel like this is especially a topic that is very talked about a lot and sensitive to a lot of our populations that we serve here at BMI. And I kind of want to just even get a sense even from you and from even also the other panelists as well. When you all think about diagnosing sort of the main problem versus the second problem, or the maybe not the second problem, but maybe the reaction and behavior that comes out of the main problem, right? So Dr. McCurtis, I'm hearing you say psychosis was the main problem. Smoking marijuana every day was the expression of how to escape from whatever pain or issue.
creating its own problem.
Right, right, which
And
continues.
what emerged as we talked, as we listened to the content of his delusions, was early trauma and an insecurity about his masculinity. So you get all of this emerging in the context of the passage into adulthood, all of these insecurities. That takes time and patience.
Yeah. And I want to elaborate that. Maybe Dr. Jeff, you can jump in because I would love to hear that it does take time and patience. And it also like takes a beginning. There's a sort of a beginning point where you can encourage men to say, hey, it's safe to talk about this, right? Obviously, Dr. McCurtis had a long standing relationship with that. So there was enough safety to eventually talk about those things.
It wasn't long standing.
Oh, it wasn't long standing in the beginning?
About 5 sessions.
Oh, wow. Wow.
There's no long standing situation nowadays. You catch it, you get in, and then people go, and then they come back.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Absolutely. Those days, thank you, Dr. McCurtis. Those days of, working with someone for 15, 20 sessions and so on, you'll tend to find that perhaps with patients who may have insurance and can afford to do that. When people are paying out of pocket, you got to get in there. As Dr. McCurtis has said, you got to capture them. You have to give them the understanding, the empowerment strategies, and then they'll come back to you when they need you.
Mm-hmm.
Every session is done as if it is the last session, and you pick up wherever you see them again. And Dr. McCurtis, as always, brilliant in his work and observations. What he talks about is, and to your point, Sean here, Dr. Best, is that, when I get young Black males who come in, I know as Dr. Riley and Dr. McCurtis knows that there's something much deeper going on. It's not just a situation of someone just being a pothead. There is a self-medication for the pain. There's something deeper going on. So some of the things I do, number one is, and why sometimes, many times it's important to see someone who looks like you, for that patient to hear, hey, I know your pain, okay? This is not just being, having empathy. I've lived that. I've gone through that. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to have perhaps bordering on a psychosis, which I once did after having an extended, really bad bout with OCD, generalized anxiety, and hypochondriasis, which are situations that I still deal with on a day-to-day basis. I'm not just feeling a little bit crazy sometimes. I make my family crazy, and I know that's something that we can all, identify with, because anxiety is one of the biggest issues of our time. It's literally eating us up alive if we don't talk about it and if we don't get some treatment for it. That's number one. Number two, instead of putting them down, which none of us do on this panel, by the way, it is about saying, okay, how do I get you to see that what you're doing is hurting you? It's hurting your chances on dating. It's hurting you know, your chances of accomplishing the things you want to do, whether it's to be a rapper, whether it's to be a football player, you know, you are compromising all of those situations. So it's not what you're doing wrong, but how can I help you to do it better? And Dr. McCurtis talked about harm reduction. Let me tell you, that is the order of the day. Trying to tell young people at this point, or anyone else in an age where marijuana smoking, especially when it is no longer illegal in some states and so on, that is such a bad thing. No, you have to look at what is it doing to you. You know what my favorite is with young Black males? I say, look, if you keep smoking like that, your chances of having babies is going to be really tough because it lowers your sperm production. They're like, what? What? So
Stop the presses.
exactly, you know, hit them where it hurts, if you know what I mean. Ooh. So it's that harm reduction of, okay, can we get you to slow it down? Can we, you know, don't smoke before you go to school. Don't smoke before you go to bed. You're wasting that high. You know, if you're going to do something, you know, and we don't tell them how to smoke, but, you know, minimize it so you're not blowing your brains out with this marijuana, or drinking the old English 800. I don't even know whether they still make that anymore. Or, you know, whatever whatever malt liquors, whatever it is, you know, stop smoking those gigantic spliff cigars, because, you know, it's going to give you, you know, issues with breathing and so on. You can't be the athlete you want to be. So it's really, as Dr. McCurtis said, really catching them where they can communicate with you, where you know their pain, where you can help them do better. And it was, again, I just felt it was so illuminating when Dr. McCurtis talked about there were some issues with this person's ideas of masculinity, feeling threatened in that way. So we see that with a lot of our young Black males, because when we talk about LGBTQ, we're still in the closet as Black folks around that, right? And our young members of the community of LGBTQ suffer more in our homes as Black people than they do perhaps in white homes, right? Or other homes. So, you know, we have to look at those things. And then, of course, and then I'll pass on the baton here, the cost of being Black. That is
Black
even
cat.
though it's the best thing on the planet, you know, if you are born into that, and not to say being Black is better than being white, I'm just saying be proud of who you are, but there is a cost for being Black in this world, and there is a heavy cost for being Black in America. You are going to pay that price. If you play, you pay.
Absolutely. I love that. I think you hit on a lot of great points, obviously, as well as Dr. McCurtis. But I just want to kind of delve in and try to ask Dr. Riley for some free information. I think she would normally get charged to give us what she's about to say, hopefully. But I wouldn't just want to talk about that self-medication idea, right? And so a lot of times when we think about how do men specifically deal with trauma? Obviously, women can deal with it the same way, and those who identify in other pronouns deal with the same way. But as we think about like the idea of how men have a hard time starting that conversation, having that trusted source or nearby person they can talk to before they even maybe even graduate to the level of talking to a therapist that they're paying for, we tend to find other self-medicating strategies. And I would just love to see if you can, or just hear from you, if you can share with us, what are self-medicating strategies that you find in your practice that people, and specifically men, resort to get themselves from dealing with the trauma that they're facing from their childhood or in the real world with the crises that we're facing today?
When I think about a lot of the males that come in for services, with many of them, the initial phone call is made by a woman in their lives. Mothers, lots of mothers calling to get services for their sons that are 21 or 22 years old, and they're exhibiting behaviors that are concerning. You know, for the mom, they're not talking, they're playing video games all day, alone in the room. Perhaps they you know, might not be getting up and taking care of their needs in the way that the parent feels that he should. So that's initially having someone in your life that's recognizing when something doesn't feel right or seem right for you and encouraging you. And even a lot of these women say, I did the research myself to find you because he, you know, didn't want to do it, didn't think it was necessary. I'm not talking to a stranger about my problems. That's something that women do. That's something that you do. But that's not something that I do. And so that's one thing. I think having someone in your life that cares about you and that recognizes that they can't help you in the way that you need to be helped. And so convincing you or encouraging you, supporting you through talking to a professional, I think is really, really very important. Now,
Yeah.
I had a thought, a Black male that I had worked with at some point who also struggled with anxiety and smoked marijuana every single day once he came home from his tech job. And one day he said to me, you know, I smoke a lot at night, but then I find that the next day my mental clarity is off. So when I'm in the office and I'm at my tech job and I'm trying to concentrate, I struggle. And so he said, he came to this, you know, after talking and, you know, coming to sessions, like this is something that he came to with what we had been working on. And he said, I want to try to smoke less and see how I feel. And then he discovered, well, I mean, I also got him connected with a psychiatrist so that he can get medication to help him manage his anxiety. But then he said, I actually feel better when I don't smoke. So now he's meeting with a psychiatrist to manage pharmacology, his anxiety. He's meeting with therapist psychologists to talk through and sort of get to the root of his issues and making decisions for himself about what he feels is working in terms of feeling better. But it was a process to get him there. Because for him, no, I feel anxious, I'm gonna smoke, it calms me down. And so it took him trying another way, like thinking through what are some things that I could do to help myself feel better. Let me try this approach and see if it works. And that's, you know, that was his own personal experience. But I've found with, I don't think, let me see, I'm trying to think, most men don't call and say, oh, I just want the appointment. They say, oh, I'm getting married. And my girlfriend said, before we get married, I have to get some therapy.
Yeah, I've seen that too. But I will tell you though, before COVID-19, and I think it's changed just a little bit, you know, and going back to that question, what is it, what do men do that are, you know, that might be unhealthy with coping with stress? It takes me back to the name of that book, Men Don't Heal, They Hoe. And so I found with a lot of the men that I was working with, if they were in a situation where they broke up with someone, if they were in a situation where they were feeling a lot of anxiety, if they were in a situation where they were in emotional pain, they would become involved in a lot of sexual affairs. And a lot of those affairs, there was not safer sex being used. And so that was a very destructive way. To me, that's just as destructive as alcoholism, just as destructive as, drug abuse, heroin, cocaine, maybe too much marijuana. Getting them to understand, hey, listen, you may feel like a man's man because you're out there and you're sleeping, with all of these other people. But really what you're expressing is the pain of being alone and of feeling less than what you really think you are, because you have to prove it. It's a way of soothing yourself. Maybe instead of having so much, unsafe sex, you should go see Dr. McCurtis, who can help you with some Ativan or something, in addition to his soothing therapy that he would offer to you.
Sure. Love that. Okay, so we talked about, so the book again is called Men Don't Heal, We Hoe.
Men Don't Heal, They Hoe. I'm not sure whether it's a book or a title. It's not my title, but it's a title that's always stuck with me because I
Good title.
I found it on Amazon. It's Men Don't Heal, We Ho, and it's written by Stephen James Dixon. So feel free to go check that out.
No pun intended in the name. Okay, go ahead.
I don't know the book at all, but that's what was mentioned. So I just want to make sure you know where to find
Yeah,
that.
very popular, very popular.
And as you talk about that right, it might be sex, it might be drugs, it might be marijuana, it might be
It might be spending
behaviors.
It might be
Spending
spending
money.
too much money, buying stuff that you don't need.
Yeah.
Anything that triggers the pleasure center.
That's right.
Anything that hits that dopamine circuit.
Could be video games. Could
10
be
hours a night of video games.
Right.
Yeah. Other college behaviors. I mean, a lot of times it can be social media, and getting those likes, and Instagram, Facebook, IG, TikTok, all the things that I don't have on my phone. But
well, Dr. McCurtis can speak about this better than Dr. Riley or I, since he is a physician. But this dopamine circuit that he talks about is so important because this is really a neurotransmitter. When you do something that feels good, the dopamine is being released. It's a reinforcer, and it says, "Ooh, that was good. Do that again." And so we find that that is one of the major issues with substance abuse, because after a while, in order to reach the threshold of getting that dopamine released, you have to have that intense excitement. So it's no longer food, it's no longer sex, it's no longer, getting good grades. Now it's about a certain type of drug that you take, that makes you feel so high that, now that's the only thing that it takes in order to get that dopamine release. But now we're seeing that it could be the video games if that's all that you're doing all the time. And we know this is epidemic with young people. So, this is something that we really need to be careful of and understand that there is a biochemical, psychosocial aspect to all of these problems. It's not just about behavior, but how behavior changes the chemistry of the body and how the chemistry changes a behavior of the mind and of the body.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that being said, I think about how behaviors, even especially for a lot of men, they go to like online porn addictions and different things that keep them sort of shackled to that feeling of that pleasure principle that you talk about, figuring out ways to just give them that dopamine shot to make them feel good and avoid dealing with the actual issues that are going on, right? And so when I think about our submersion as not just men, there's a lot of women who are also feeling the same kinds of addictions and the same kinds of coping mechanisms. But when we think about now, like, how do you deal with external factors that you cannot control, right? So for a lot of our students in BMI and beyond, a lot of students are facing it could be poverty or having the lack of resources because COVID now means they either can't have a job or employment, or perhaps they're even struggling with just having financial means and they're living with other family members and living with multiple families in one home and having rarely a place to even physically be able to study and engage in class without having multiple faces around, or even just a response of how are we dealing with the narrative in this country about Black lives not mattering as much as other lives do, and how you deal with that sort of stigma that's out there that's telling you in media and telling you in sort of the police brutality cases that we have witnessed that we obviously have not been given the same exact freedoms or same exact equity opportunities or access or opportunities, whatever, that we need in order to feel like we're fully American, fully human, fully belong. Specifically, I'm thinking about the shootings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and additionally, Jacob Blake as the latest rendition of the same narrative, that we see that we are being policed 10 times harder and not given the same opportunities to really just be protected by police and law enforcement. And so when you all see these factors, and you're probably dealing with young people who might be coming in who start specifically saying, hey, I am actually having a hard time feeling my worth and seeing my value, right? Where do you begin that conversation, and how do we even encourage our CUNY BMI community to start understanding where to find their pockets of worth and resources that can help them feel like 100% human, 100% heard, 100% valued for who they are, and not expected to be something other than that in order to be really fully appreciated in a country or state or environment or neighborhood that they live in? How do we begin those conversations and give them that value?
As you articulated that, what came to my mind is historical consciousness. What you described is a recipe for hopelessness and despair. And the antidote for that is historical consciousness, I believe, because there is nothing new under the sun when it comes to the saga, to the trial that we have experienced as Black people. This cycle that we are experiencing now with the reemergence of white supremacy, people say all the time, if you look at the scope of history between the Emancipation Proclamation and now, you see this same phenomena. And you can also predictably understand what triggered it. Every time there's Black agency, every time there is a movement of our people toward agency and autonomy, it triggers extreme guilty fear in a specific population of white people. Mm-hmm. And they respond with anger, aggression, murderous rage. If you look at history, you see that. And so we have always dealt with it. We have to be able to appreciate our resilience as a people and have cultural fidelity toward ourselves. See, what happens to us is that despair and hopelessness causes us sometimes to lose our cultural fidelity. And either it causes us to become so despondent that we become self-destructive. But if we can get a sense, wrap our heads around who we are and where we've come from as a people and how we've done it and what strengths we have that have sustained us. So I think it's critical for us to focus not on our problems, but on our strengths. Our spirituality being one of them, you see, our perseverance being another. Those are things that we are tried and true strengths that are in our epigenetic selves, culturally. So that's what I think we have to always present to people. We've been here before. We've got through this. It'll come again, and we'll get through it. This is a continual battle that we have to fight. And we have fought it, and we have the tools. We can do it. That's basically what came to my mind when you presented this.
Let me add a part 2 to that, because everything that Dr. McCurtis has said is absolutely right on. The resiliency that we have to celebrate that. The historical aspects of what we have brought to this country and to the world, the beauty and the strength and so on. The part 2 to that is what we're seeing now with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, and Ron West, who's part of your team, valuable part of your team, we've talked about this offline many times. This cannot be a Black Lives Matter moment. It has to be a Black Lives Matter movement. And until we understand that Black lives matter, no other lives are going to matter, because racism is at the foundation of this great republic. And therefore, in order for it to be a better union, we have to work through the trauma that has hurt not just Black people, not just Native Americans, not just Latinx people, but also white people, but also Asians and Asian Americans, for what has happened to them in this country, and so many others. So the other part of that, of course, is understanding, and this is not a blame game. I say this to my students at the medical school because somehow through default, I've become the person who talks to them about racism and bias. You know, it's not that I looked for the position, but, you know, I didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on me. So, you know, you seize the moment when they ask you, and then you try to educate psychologically as much as possible how racism has affected all of us as a nation and as a world. But we have to address, again, not pointing fingers, how white privilege plays into this, and how people need to understand that if they identify as being white, that automatically gives them a boundary that they may not be looking for. They may not be looking for a wall. They may not looking to be separated from people of color, but it already gives them a step up, if not several steps up in society. And so when people say, hey, I'm colorblind, well, that's well and good. And I'm so glad that you are. But if you say that you're colorblind, then that means that you're not acknowledging that there are people who are racist and that racism does exist. That in fact, it's not just, you know, we've seen white supremacist groups increase by 55% during this presidency, according to
Absolutely.
the, you know, Law Poverty Center, right? And so
Right.
this speaks to Dr. McCurtis's point of this revulsion, of a backlash, you know, as we see things are beginning to change. So we have to stay the course, but we can't do it alone. We have to do it multiculturally. We have to do it with not just brown and Black people, but also with white people. We have to embrace those who want to be part of the movement, and we see it in the peaceful protests and the peaceful demonstrations. And therefore, when people are able to understand that white privilege exists and it's part of systemic and institutional racism, which is real. They asked President Trump, Woodruff asked President Trump, is institutional racism, systemic racism, is it real? And he waffled on that. And he really couldn't tell us what he really felt about that. That is a message that is not clear, and that does not help us. And we know white supremacy has become part of politics. But we have to look at white privilege as being real, and we have to look at that white fragility comes out of that, in that people feel, oh no, not me. I'm not supporting systemic racism. I'm not supporting institutional racism. They are not. But when you are born into a society where it is part of the foundation, in order to call it out, you must recognize it. And
And
so,
what I love
and
about what you're saying is that this idea of recognizing that you benefit from that, and if you don't call it out, then what happens is there's this sense of social or racial solidarity and racial social identity that you protect by not calling out where you benefit, that you just continue to perpetuate.
that's right.
Again, right?
That's right. And it's not intentional. And, you know, we're not getting into the blame game. And, you know, we're not, you know, what we're saying is we've got to bring in everyone. It's got to be multicultural. The movement has to be all of us, regardless of race, regardless of gender, regardless of sexuality. We've got to do it together. We cannot, as brown and black people do this alone. We've got to lead it, but we need the support of our white brothers and sisters and all the other cultures that are out there.
Yeah, I love that. And Dr. Riley, if you can just keep expanding on that, I want to also add to that as a layer as well, because we've gotten a few questions from the audience and we're going to go into those in a second, but most of them are for you. So I want to talk about just as we're talking about those resources and addressing how do we like approach these conversations, you know, there is a sense of like, one day you can feel great about your mental health and the next day you feel like you're off, right? Depends on contextually what's going on within your life and your world. So when you think about the crisis that we're facing and the Black Lives Matter, and just kind of expanding on what Dr. Gardir said, what are some ideas, some resources you can give us to start these conversations? And how do you monitor daily mental health best practices?
The first thought that I had was it's really very important for us to educate ourselves about our history and the positive ways in which we've contributed to humanity. When I think about, you know, where I am in my life today and where my grandmother, who's a woman from a small town in South Carolina, where she was in her life and the opportunities that were available to her, I have to acknowledge that there were some opportunities available to me that were not available to her, and that a lot of what she did, and my grandmother was very active in the 60s in fighting for civil rights for Blacks. She came from the South to the North and she got arrested a bunch of times. I mean, you know, in Brooklyn. So she was very, very involved. But when I think about all that she endured with the arrest and all the contact with the police and going back and forth to DC, what she did really paved the way for me to be able to go to college and to be able to go to graduate school and to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. And so I think it's important to sort of educate and acknowledge the ways in which opportunities are available to us today. What I say to young people who say, because you know we have a lot of young people that come into our practice, and at the height of all of this with COVID and then the Black Lives Matter in the streets, we've had young people say, well, I want to get involved. I don't know what to do. I'm really afraid of getting COVID, but I want to go in March. I want to somehow contribute and feel like I am making a difference in some way. And so I encourage them to talk to people who think like you, right? And so like talk to people who are passionate in the way that you're passionate. And in some ways, social media can be a good avenue for this, that you're going online and you're communicating with people who think like you and you're getting some support in that way. Whatever else you feel safe enough to do, to go out and volunteer, to encourage people to think more about their circumstances and ways in which they can be an asset to helping their communities. But I think the key is education, educating yourself and talking about the past and, you know, where we are today in relation to, you know, where our parents and grandparents were.
Yeah, I love that. I think there's a lot of great resources online now to understand your history before slavery, your history before our American contributions to the world, and understanding how even spiritually our pedigree and perpetuating and bringing forth Christianity and spiritual religions that are outside of Christianity as well, and perpetuating them as a means of keeping our own sanity, our own mental health in check, and to kind of have that as a language to learn how to access that inner being that really keeps us strong. I want to kind of go into questions here. If you are in the audience and you're able to submit your questions via YouTube or Facebook, go ahead and do that now. I've already got about a few, 3 or 4 that have come through that I'm going to ask to the panel. But also, too, we're going to release a survey to you as well to let us know what you think about this conversation and letting us know what more content you want us to bring to you in the future. So go ahead and please complete that survey. We'll release that to you via the listserv, via Facebook, via YouTube. Follow those links. Let us know how we have done with this conversation and how we can help keep these conversations going and bringing the right people to the table. So the first question I have is that, and so somewhat what I mentioned earlier about how the demand has now increased for all of you, for all of your own services. And so there are some who are saying, hey, I've been trying to get a therapist. I cannot get access to one. There's just nobody available. So someone asked, what are some mental health resources available for those who can't access therapy because of demand?
Dr. Riley?
Yes, complicated, but there are insurance. Insurance, I think, is a barrier for a lot of people. If you don't have insurance, if the therapist that you're trying to book an appointment with does not take your insurance, there are a lot of low cost or sliding scale resources available in various communities and neighborhoods throughout New York City. And so you can do a Google search for low cost mental health services. I have had many patients tell me that they belong to various groups on Facebook and all these other social media platforms where they talk about issues, they support each other, you know, people that they don't know, but they become friendly with in these groups. And so I think that that's also another way, if someone doesn't have insurance or doesn't have the financial means to be able to schedule a therapy appointment, talking to family and friends, talking to people who are close to you, your roommate, sitting down at the table and talking about your day or your thoughts or the news or what's happening with current events, you know, talking to people around you, which I think during quarantine we've all been kind of forced to do, is to sit still and talk more to people who are close to you. It also struck me that many young people say, nobody talks on the phone anymore. Everyone texts.
They even have an app for that too, right? If you just want to text what your issues are. So those are really great suggestions that Dr. Riley gave. The other one is, as Dr. McCurtis can share with you, is I can share with you because, you know, we work in different urban organizations. I work for a clinic called All Med, rehabilitative and psychological services. I'm not trying to push them in any way, but I know one of the things that we do is if you don't have insurance and you come in, guess what? We will help you get insurance. We'll help you get insurance for two reasons, okay? Number one is we want you to get some help. But number two, we want to get paid, right? We're giving you the service. So there is an incentive for us to help you to get the insurance. And if you can't get the insurance, then we'll give you a sliding scale, whatever it is that you can afford. So, you know, the services are really out there, but you just have to.
You said that name again, is it All Med?
All Med rehabilitative psychological services. And they're located in the Bronx. We have an office on St. Anne's Avenue, one in Bronx Boulevard and one in Queens. And I'll give Jorge the number and he can publish that if he likes. And so they're out there working in the community. By the way, one quick correction. I said Bob Woodruff, it's Bob Woodward. You see how that OCD works? You can make it work for you, who was talking to the president. But there are many, many different ways that you can get out there and access that. I know it's tough, but you never give up. You keep moving forward. And Dr. Riley is right. Sometimes you have to have your own informal groups to be able to talk to folks. But if it's something that is a real mental health challenge, you've got to find your way to getting to a professional.
Love that. Love that. So just we're going to put some of these resources available after the presentation, but also just recapping a couple of those things that were said. Talkspace is another online app that you can use to talk to someone in an instant. All Medical Group, which is available obviously in the Bronx, and also nyccare.nyc. nyccare.nyc is where you could also find low cost or affordable healthcare as well. Dr. McCurtis?
Samaritan Village is another resource for people who may not be able to pay, who need assistance in getting affordable treatment. And it has clinics all over in all of the boroughs, substance abuse as well as mental health service.
Love that. SamaritanVillage.org. village.org. Awesome. Another great resource.
I also think it's important that students on CUNY campuses understand that there are resources on their individual campuses. There are counseling centers. I'm not sure about how long it takes to get an appointment. I'm not sure about what that process is, but I do know that on these CUNY campuses, there are counseling services that are available to students who are in need. And I think they might be more short-term, and then they connect them with someone in the community. But that could be a first step. That could be a first step. Also, I can forward resources that I have that we give to patients who reach out to us at our practice. The practice website is srpsychologicalservices.com. And when patients come to us for support and we're not able to, either they don't have the insurance, they can't afford the services, even a sliding scale for them does not make sense, we work with them to find a resource that will be helpful to them. Because I know how hard it is to access services in New York City, and I've been hearing this for a long, long time. So we absolutely take the time to connect them with resources that are available in New York City. So I can forward those resources to you as well.
Great, awesome. srpsychologicalservices.com, and
Yes.
we'll post that as well. It's another great resource. I have two more questions here, and then we'll kind of sort of slowly start to wrap up. And then one question is, what tips would you give? We have a lot of college administrators that are on this call or on listening through YouTube or the live stream. And college administrators and teachers want to know, what are tips that they can, what tips would you give teachers for checking in on students' mental health, right? I know a lot of times teachers, administrators might recognize this student is off, something's going on, they might need support, but they don't maybe have the capacity to kind of like guide them and partner them through the entire process, right? So what tips would you give to teachers or administrators for checking in on students' mental health? Whoever wants to jump in.
I certainly think that the answer is in the question. Check in. Check in on all your students, send them an email and ask them how it is that they're doing. One of the tasks, one of the, I have a list of things to do, as you can see here. So one of the things that I have on that list is checking in with my students, with my mentees, with my advisees. Just, how are you doing? How are you handling the pandemic? What's going on at home? They'll let you know. The fact that you reach out to them, I think, is very important. But the other part of that is faculty and staff. How are you doing? Are you checking in on yourselves? Because you're at risk also for COVID-19. You're at risk for all of the stressors that come along with that. You're at risk for all the stressors of doing a hybrid or a full online educational program. That's a lot that we're asking from you. In many ways, you are frontline workers. And so in order to take care of these students, you really need to take care of yourselves, and doing a lot of the things that Dr. Best does, exercising, eat, pray, meditation, all of those things. Listen, you may be a superhero, but you are not superhuman. Take care of yourselves too.
Really good, really good. Anyone else want to add to that? I think that's a really good.
Dr. Best, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me right now? No.
Hear you. I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right. So anyone else want to add to that or add another tip to the recommendations? Because listen, I say with this, Dr. Gardier, we have a couple of BMI projects that have developed a check-in survey for our students that go along the way. So every time they do a weekly session, whether it be a chat and chew or just a socio-emotional support session or skills building session, they also send out a survey that says, how are you doing? How are you handling the challenges of working from home? What's your biggest challenge right now? We can provide some more support for you. And also some BMI project directors have also created like a resource list of the counseling services that are available on CUNY's campus, as well as some other external sources like Talkspace. The CUNY Central Counseling Services has inked an agreement with, I believe, Talkspace or another one of those sort of Headspace mental health meditation apps, so that people can learn to add meditation as a part of their life to get centered. A lot of times when the anxiety comes that many of us have talked about today, it's because we are feeling anxious about what just happened or what's about to happen, which means we're always living in the future or we're always living in the past. We're not being present about our circumstances and staying, having the resources to learn how to stay present and only control the behaviors we can control today. So Talkspace is a good one. Headspace is a good one. Anyone else have any good recommendations for administrators, tools to help support their students, especially those like Dr. McCurtis, you mentioned you work with those who are reentry students. And a lot of times the reentry population does have added stressors for coming back into college and now dealing with being remote. What would you say in terms of like good sentences that you can give administrators to add on to say, to know how to check in on those students?
Well, I want to clarify something. I misunderstood when you said reentry. My focus on reentry was reentry into society from incarceration.
Yeah. So no, it's the same, but
That was what I was thinking, and I thought
we use the same. We use the same phrase. We use the same phrase, actually, reentry, for also those who are coming from incarceration back into college as well.
That's what I thought you meant,
Yeah.
and I was really pleased, quite pleased to think that the Black Male Initiative was tapping into that stream of people as well.
That's where the Black men are, unfortunately.
That's right. That's what I thought you meant, and that's why I made the comment. But at any rate, back to your subject, you know, this thing has hit us all, and it has turned our worlds upside down. All of the helping people, teachers, professionals, we've all been challenged by this. So we are helping, but we are also traumatized. See, it's like 9/11 amplified to a global extent. We've all been rendered helpless and powerless in the face of this thing. There's no, and to your theme of feelings and thoughts about the future. I think what's the other thing? Feelings,
anxieties,
fear, and the future.
Oh, yeah.
That has impacted all of us. And so when the doctor says that we're not superheroes, he's absolutely correct. Teachers, physicians, police, everybody has been impacted by this. And I think that honest appreciation is one of the first things that we have to do, because denial is the enemy of our recovery. And we see that this virus has split us into two groups: the deniers, and you see them at the beach, and the people who are catastrophically sequestered into their apartments, afraid to get out. And somewhere in between, but we are all struggling with this thing.
Yeah.
And we have to be compassionate with ourselves. We have to apply the serenity principle. God grant me the serenity to tackle the things that I can, accept the things that I can't do anything with, and pray for the wisdom to be able to tell the difference. That's advice that I give everybody during this time, apply the serenity principle, because we've all been overwhelmed by this thing.
Yes, I love that. And I just want to repeat that again, just to make sure the audience heard that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change. The strength
Courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Beautiful. Love that. Thank you so much, man. That's so good. I want to also just kind of wrap with one more question, and I'm gonna and Dr. Riley, feel free to elaborate on the last one as well. But just to kind of understanding, what are the benefits, the difference between individual therapy and group therapy, and what are some of the benefits that people can have from maybe being part of group therapy that are different than individual therapy?
I think group therapy, especially in this situation that we're in, that we're all experiencing, I think it helps to normalize the fears that young people or people in general, all of us have. When I think about talking to administrators and teachers and giving them some sort of guidance on how to encourage and work with their students, I think peers talking to one another is really very important, because I think they need to hear one another say, I feel anxious. I'm worried about all of this. I'm worried about getting sick. I'm worried about how, my parents are going to pay the rent, or how I am going to pay the rent. And I think normalizing this level of anxiety is really very important, so that people don't feel that it's sort of an overreaction. But it's a fear that is as a result of realistic life circumstances that we're all dealing with. And so I think in groups, individuals have an opportunity to feel that someone else is also going through something similar, feeling something similar, and that it's normal. I'm not strange or different or abnormal. What I'm feeling, the fears, the worries, the uncertainty, the worries about hopes and dreams for the future, and what will happen to myself and my little sister or my mom or my dad or whomever, that these are normal fears to have in these really uncertain times. And so I think at this time in particular, the benefit of being in therapy with a group of people is that they're normalizing their experiences, versus the individual one-on-one, which also for many people are very helpful, is to get that sort of one-on-one work through of what a person is dealing with. But I think the peer support is really important at this time.
I agree with that. In the individual, here is where you actually can be narcissistic in a positive way, in that you're addressing your individual issues. You're working with your therapist on, putting the spotlight on the things that are painful for you, how you can change and how you can do better. And, just adding on to what Dr. Riley said with the group therapy, it's a way to normalize situations. You are not alone. Social distancing doesn't mean that you're alone. It's a way to connect. We're doing group therapy online, not necessarily with a circumscribed group, but when you're online and you're talking to other people. And remember those days, Dr. McCurtis and Dr. Riley, when we gave that advice, stay away from social media, it's gonna rot your brain. Well, guess what? The worm turns, and now it's saving our lives. But the other part of group therapy is that it allows us to share empowerment strategies. What works for you? What works for you? What works for you? Let me tell you what works for me. And now let's just keep moving forward with the power of the group. And I wish, and I'll just keep quiet here, that as America, we had a group therapy. I don't want to see, as Dr. McCurtis has talked about, we have deniers and we have people who are into the science. Let's come together and save this great country of ours. Let's make it multicultural. We're all brothers and sisters. We can agree to agree and agree to disagree. And that's what's missing in these tribal politics that we see right now. Let's come together to save this planet and to save this great country of ours.
So often we stop two sentences short of finding intersection in our perspectives, and we just stop the conversation because we think we're just so far apart, but actually we're more alike than we're different. And I love that idea normalizing these conversations so that we can find those intersections a little bit more common. Dr. McCurtis?
Well, I was going to say that the virus has been the great unifier in the sense that this is Mother Nature, chemistry, physics, and biology. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And it shines a mirror to us.
Yeah.
And all of us.
That mirror is very real for sure.
Heals our basic humanity, you know.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, and it has put a light on the fact that there are social injustices. Brown and Black people have been disproportionately affected. But Dr. McCurtis, as you talked about, all of us as a society, Black, brown, white, all, gender, sexuality, we've all been affected. And so how do we turn this from a post-traumatic stress to a post-traumatic growth? How do we come together, respect and love one another despite race, and be able to work together to bring a better situation for all of us? It's not going to happen with just a vaccine.
Yeah. And if you said those young people in the street, they give us hope. Mm-hmm. Those young people, all hues, and colors, they give us hope.
Yeah. I love that right now with young people and all people who are out there in the streets. There's such a transparency and honesty about how they feel about their experience. There's no more filtering how they feel about it. It's getting it out there and just being very open about their perspectives, so that now we're being forced to change, or else there will be a war at some level in some way. And so because we are in this impending war, I want to kind of wrap this conversation about thinking about how we normalize first healing ourselves with these conversations, and then using that as a platform to now enter the world with a more emotionally healthy approach, so that we are still fighting for change and justice, but we're doing it from a place of saying that because it's out of love, it's out of care for ourselves, our neighbors, our family, our friends, valuing those that are our neighbors as much as we value ourselves. Learning how to do that, I want to just kind of wrap up with just your best self-care practice that you maybe employ yourself, or something you can just say that, like, a lot of times there's an assumption that therapists are also good at self-care, but that might not be the case. Maybe you're struggling somewhere, but what would you say is one takeaway as a best self-care practice that you would admonish others to take or to think about adding to their arsenal going forward? So let's start with Dr. Riley, then Dr. Gardier, then Dr. McCurtis to wrap us up.
I would say every day, think about what your meaning and purpose is for today. What do I want to accomplish today? What can I control today? I can't control what happened yesterday. That's done. What can I do today to take care of myself? Perhaps I need to sleep an additional hour. Perhaps I need to drink, 3 more cups of water. Perhaps I need to reach out to a friend to talk about the sleepless night I just had. What can you do to control your life and your circumstances today so that you can feel good about, what the day has in store for you? And, we don't know what will happen, but the things that we can control and be hopeful about, our hopes and dreams, ideas for the future, talk to your friends, talk to your loved ones, talk about your passions, talk about things that you want to see happen differently, like in your life and for the lives of people that you love and people around you. And so I think talking to like-minded individuals is really important in terms of getting support and having a sort of focus on how you get there, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I'll just add to that, if you don't know how to start those conversations, I found this really cool game called the Skin Deep game that helps you ask questions for 5 different categories. It's a friend's version, a stranger's version, a family version, a coworker's version, and a couple's version. And it just gives you a bunch of questions to be able to ask that are about anything from personal, finance, love, money, whatever. But it's really interesting way to get to know people who you care about. And if you don't know the sentences or vocabulary to start with, you can start with a game like that. It's really fun, called the Skin Deep game. So not me for an ad, but something to keep in mind.
Meditation, I think, helps. Perhaps you take 10 minutes to meditate while you're in the shower or before you get into the shower. Patients tell me that they find that to be really very helpful. Is sitting in the quiet and trying to kind of sort of quiet your mind so that you're not, having all these racing thoughts. For some people, it's exercise, it's stretching, it's yoga, it's going for a walk. So whatever it is that you do that you find helpful to feeling more stable at any moment in time, I think it's important to try to use.
Thank you. That's great. We're cataloging all these ideas. Dr. Gardia.
What was the name of that game? Skin what?
Skin deep.
Skin deep. I like that. My favorite is Skin Tight. Ohio players. Don't get me started.
Oh my goodness.
All right. Oldie but moldy. So, I agree with what everyone has said. I think it's important that, of course, that we exercise, that we maintain our spirituality. But the reason that I like what our young people are doing is that they're out there peacefully protesting and demonstrating. We have to understand what they're doing is a catharsis. It's a freeing. It's, as BT Express, another oldie but goldie, shout it out. Just shout it out. Say how you feel. Don't internalize it. Free yourself in any way you can by expressing your voice, by expressing your pain. So it's not, if you're not out there protesting and you're stuck in your home like I am, or you're working out of your office like Dr. McCurtis, because we may not have that energy to get out there on the streets and demonstrate. But, it's about talking to our loved ones about what it is that we're seeing, what it is that we're feeling. But here's the most important thing: positivity, staying hopeful, knowing all is in divine order. Whether you believe in the creator or not, believe in spirituality. Your spirituality, believe that there is a meaning and a purpose for us all, and we are going through it. As Sigmund Freud once said, when you're going through hell, keep on going. Actually, Sigmund Freud didn't say that, but I thought I'd legitimize it in that way.
Keep on going. I like that. That's great. I do feel that catharsis even myself, being out there in the streets, and my mom is terrified about my well-being, but I'm like, I gotta be out here. Like, I need to be around these people and this energy. So thank you for giving us that affirmation in that way.
Absolutely. And mask it up and make sure that you social distance.
Absolutely.
Wash your hands.
March on Washington. I had to be there. I couldn't.
And that was and that was a stinging rebuke to our politicians who said that we might be out there with spreader events, which we know our peaceful demonstrators are not doing that. We see it in some of the hate groups and some of the other political factions that are pushing divisiveness. And I'll leave it at that.
Good stuff. Dr. McCurtis, please wrap us up with that. Some here.
As I understood your request, what can we do? Well, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, how we've been confronted with this overwhelming challenge of the virus, rendering us feeling powerless and helpless in the face of it. And my suggestion of applying the serenity principle. For myself, I look at the strength of self-regulation, and I would encourage all people to pay attention to that basic strength that we have and to begin to nurture it. And how do you nurture it? You nurture it by doing what everybody has said. Dr. Riley expressed it very comprehensively. You regulate your sleep. You make sure you get adequate sleep. You can do that. You regulate your diet. I practice intermittent fasting, and you regulate that your diet, and you exercise. These are things that you can, if you set a bedtime, you set a time you get up, You exercise. You set a time that you're going to eat. You're not going to be, and you eat well. And then you set your activity list, your personal, your professional activities. You can organize. These are things that you can control, even in the midst of chaos. People in prison learn freedom because they find that they are the most free in confinement because they learn self-regulation.
Yeah.
Nobody can take that strength away from you. And so to a certain extent, the loss, and I say that in every grief, every loss, there's a gift. It may be that this pandemic, the gift that we have is that it turns us back upon ourselves. Remember I said that the virus shines a mirror on us and makes us look at ourselves, and hopefully we can see our strengths and begin to use our strengths to solve our problems that we're confronted with. That would be my hope.
I love that as a wrap up, especially that imagery of the mirror, because I do firmly believe with all my heart that any expression of pain or evil toward another person or anger toward another person, a lot of times is just a reflection of what's going on inside.
Oh, yeah.
And when you begin to understand that mirror, then you look at outside crisis not as necessarily your thing, but if you are not healed inwardly, then whatever's happening on the outside is going to control how you feel about your day, about how you feel about your life. And so we have to learn to look at the mirror and then just say, where is it highlighting for me a need for me to self-regulate and add on these good practices and habits that keep me centered, keep present.
I would say ask some basic questions as we look in that mirror. What is my core belief about myself, about the world, and about other people? And how did it get to be that? And how does it influence how I treat other people and myself?
Yeah. Beautiful. All right, we're going to wrap there. This is great. Thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us. Dr. Riley, you're a treasure. Your honesty, your sincerity is beautiful. Dr. McCurtis, you brought a level of depth and wisdom, and I'm going to be asking myself and those students this question: what does the world say? What does it mean about myself, the world, and others? What do I believe? And that's going to be resonating for us for ages. Dr. Gardir, you bring innovative ideas, creativity, and genuine authenticity to everything you say and to the resources you've given us today to take from. And hopefully some of our students will visit your practice in the Bronx or the other different resources that we've listed today from your wisdom and insight. So thank you all for taking this time. And for those who are watching, we appreciate your time here today. Thank you for being with us and sticking with us. This video will be recorded this session today. It'll be available on our YouTube link and on our social media. So please share it with your students, your friends, your colleagues. Take care of yourself first, and then take care of each other. Remember, like on the airplane, you can't save somebody else until you put your air mask on first. So please take care of yourselves, and then you'll be able to take care of each other much better. So thank you for this time today. All the best, and we'll see you next month in October, second week for the town hall. And don't forget, October 1st and 2nd is our 15th annual CUNY BMI conference that's happening virtually. So please find us at CUNY BMI, DM us for more information, and we'll be in touch. Have a great day. Thanks all for participating. We'll see y'all soon.
Thank
It's
you.
a pleasure, Dr. Riley and Dr. Gardir.
Pleasure, Dr. McCurtis. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, I'll follow up with all y'all separately. We'll talk soon. Take care now.
All right, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.